I couldn't leave. I sat by her side day and night, attending to all of her needs. In the end, she left all of her real estate property to her biological children, and all I got was the rundown old house. Marie had been paralyzed for 10 years, but her children were constantly too busy pursuing their own lives, going on vacations, going to parties, and enjoying what they called freedom. House on Main Street in Pine Creek. Marie's daughter Lauren never missed an opportunity to make a scathing remark to her about me being nothing more than a housekeeper. As someone who was easily ignored and beneath recognition, respect was a currency she never bothered to spend on me. However, once I began cleaning out that old house, I discovered things I never would have imagined, like the morning sunlight spilling through the window and softly lighting Marie's face. She asked me if I could make her a chicken pot pie, and I wiped her face and massaged her limbs while she kept her eyes on me as if she had something more to say, something caught in the space between us. In the kitchen, I started rolling dough, seasoning, and measuring everything by feel, but when I looked back, I saw that her complexion appeared a little brighter than usual. Once the pie had cooled a little, I cut it into small bites and fed her slowly, one forkful at a time. She chewed, slowly, as she always did, and normally took a long time to finish a meal, but today was different. Her appetite surprised me. Normally, she barely made it through a few bites, but today she finished the entire plate and even asked for some warm broth, which she sipped. At 1:52 in the morning, I woke up and noticed something was off. Her hand was cold, and I panicked. I leaned in to check her breathing, but all I could hear was the echo of silence, so I had no choice but to let go. My heart tearing open as I said, in small intervals, quiet but present, "You've got quite the appetite today." I laughed softly, half to her and half to myself. But for some reason, that moment gave me a strange sense of comfort, said through a constricted throat, "Marie, Mom, you were gone just hours after she finished her favorite chicken pot pie at 9 a.m. in the morning." Lauren burst through the door and yelled at me, "What did you do? What did you feed my mom for a second?" I almost lost it. "You think I did something to her after all these years? When have you ever really cared about her? I was by her side for 10 years straight while you were away having fun, and now you come here to accuse me." My voice was trembling with rage, getting sharper with each word, and Lauren shot back coldly, "If you didn't have a secret agenda, why would you have stayed?" All these years, I stood looking at her in silence, my eyes locked on hers, and something in my gaze must have unnerved her because she quickly stopped talking. The husband grabbed her arm in an obvious attempt to defuse the situation. He turned to face me and said, "Kylie, if you have any semblance of decency, just keep your mouth shut and make sure Marie gets a proper funeral." After the funeral, they began fighting over the inheritance, and there was no sign of sorrow left in the room. They divided up several houses, each of which received one in that row. Sometimes the harshness of human nature cuts deeper than a winter wind. Marie had to raise 3 children alone after her husband died in an accident at the age of 41. She struggled to support her family on a small corn farm in the suburbs, overseeing dozens of acres by herself. 10 years ago, she suffered a stroke that left her with no money left. When she was paralyzed, my husband, Chad, had already abandoned us and disappeared without a trace. Lauren and her brother Brad were still minors when I became Chad's wife, so I didn't think twice about taking on all of the responsibilities for his mother. When they eventually grew up and began living on their own, they simply threw all of the responsibility on me and never looked back. Of course, I have occasionally felt resentment because she was their mother. After all, how could they be so cold and uncaring? I vowed to myself that I would continue to fight them if only to prove them wrong. But now that I was witnessing them fight over money, and not a single one of them thanked me after 10 years of care, I felt like a complete joke. I was unable to compare to her biological children, and the resentment that burned in my chest would not go away. But I didn't want to become someone petty or ungrateful, because Marie really had a good heart. From the day I married Chad, she treated me like her own daughter and always had dinner ready when I got home, even washing the fruit and arranging it neatly on the kitchen counter. She was calm and gentle and never impatient, and even when I lost my temper and yelled at her, she was patient and gentle enough to put a full meal on the table and calm me down. She never let me do any hard work. Instead, she always said, "I'll take care of it." She never put any pressure on me about having children. Instead, she would laugh and say, "Don't be silly. Raising kids isn't every woman's duty. You're still young. Enjoy your life. Her grace frequently exceeded that of my own mother over the holidays. Don't end up like me, giving everything, and having nothing left. I didn't think much of her words back then, but now I know that she just wanted me to live a little lighter. Kindness has its reward as long as I can answer to my own conscience, and nothing else really matters anymore. The following morning, I sat up in bed as usual, only to realize after a moment's pause that the house no longer held Marie's breath. Before I could think about the silence, a knock came. I had hardly had time to react when a familiar voice called out from outside the door, "Kylie, you should really think about selling the house Mom left you." They were Brad Marie's youngest son, and they were offering a generous price and planning to renovate the entire place. "Come on, Kylie, this house is old and falling apart, so it's not safe for you to stay here alone. Why not move out and take the money while you can?" The person who didn't often show up, I didn't even bother to turn to face him, and I said flatly, "Now please leave, Kylie. I'm just trying to help." Lauren had already sold her place next door, and she's obviously smarter than you, so she's already pocketed the money while you're still holding on to this old dump. Deals like this don't come up. He didn't even finish his speech before leaving, acting as though the house was his to sell. A few days later, the street shook with the sounds of drills and bulldozers tearing down what was left of the old house, and it was loud, startling, and completely ironic if Marie could witness this. The homes she had spent her life building for her kids didn't even last a week after she left, and I thought about leaving too. But I wanted to clean the place thoroughly one last time before I did. This was the house where my husband grew up, and even though he hadn't been here in years, I hoped that if he ever returned, he would still recognize this small piece of his past. I started rearranging everything room by room and then carrying a bucket of water. When I came out into the hallway, I saw muddy footprints on the recently cleaned floor. I scowled because the old wooden floorboards had moved a little and were a little worn thin from age. I knelt down and pried up one of the loose boards to inspect them for damage and froze since there was a stash of $100 bills hidden beneath the floor. As I lowered the board back down, my hands shook and my heart raced with shock. Where had the money gone? Did Marie leave it? How had she gotten so much money? And why would she hide it here? I locked the door behind me and cautiously went back to the location. I opened the compartment once more and started gathering the bills, stacking them into a black trash bag. The money was neatly wrapped layer after layer, and it took me $300,000 in cash. And as I reached to close the floorboards once more, I saw a yellow envelope at the bottom. Inside was a small, crumpled note written in Marie's shaky handwriting. "Dear Kylie, this money is for you. Stop waiting for Chad. He's not worth it. Live your life, sweetheart. I've always thought of you. I've always wished the best for you." My hands trembled as I held the note, my throat constricted, and I was at a loss for words. It was when I finally came to terms with Marie's passing that the string I had been holding inside of me for 10 long years finally broke, and I started crying uncontrollably. My cries reverberated throughout the house like a storm releasing. Years of frustration, grief, and loneliness, leaving nothing but honest silence in their wake. I'm not sure how long I cried, but it wasn't until my body failed that I stopped. I washed my face, looked into the mirror at my swollen eyes, and then my eyes strayed to the black bag behind me. How had she saved so much? Her children had treated her with cold indifference for years, never even imagining that she had secretly left me something like this. Those houses they fought over out here weren't worth more than $30,000. However, it became clear to me that Marie had always considered me the only person she could really trust after she had abandoned 10 times that amount of money. This realization was followed by a wave of shame at how foolish all those moments of bitterness I had carried seemed now that I had never seen so much money in my life. The sheer weight of it overwhelmed me, and I felt grateful, anxious, and Stunned, but I managed to gather myself and get the first thing I needed. I had to make sure that the money was securely deposited into a bank account because I couldn't bear the thought of having that much money in a trash bag. That afternoon, I made sure to leave the house at a time when it was quieter outside because the street was unusually quiet. I split the money into 2 parts and planned to deposit them into different banks. But the entire way there, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone was watching me, like a pair of eyes hiding in the shadows. But every time I turned around, the street was deserted save for the wind-blown rustle of fallen leaves. After I completed the deposits and left the bank, the sun was still warming the sidewalk, and the rich, comforting smell of food wafted from the restaurant next door. I looked down at my watch, which was about to depart, and all of a sudden a quiet warmth rose in my chest. We had a son after Chad and I were married, and ever since he began attending school, my parents have helped with pickup and drop-off, bringing him home to their place in the evenings. Over the years, they have silently carried the burden of motherhood on my behalf. They are older now, but they have never once grumbled, understood the burdens I was carrying, and never asked for anything in return. They have always stood by me without talking. I was able to finally be a mother in the truest sense after Marie left. I picked up my phone and called Mom. "Don't cook tonight. You and Dad pick up Ethan and meet me at Gloucester's restaurant. Dinner's on me." I could immediately hear the change in her voice, which became lighter and more cheerful. When I saw them enter the restaurant, I waved with a smile I hadn't worn in a long time. I returned the smile and went over. For a brief moment, it felt like we were traveling back, in time to a time when the 3 of us would go out for meals like this. Hearts full and days simpler. I watched my face so they wouldn't see how I was feeling inside. I gave my parents a tight hug, maybe a bit too tight, and Ethan wriggled next to me. "Mom, you're squeezing too hard. I can't breathe." I laughed out loud. "Come on, sit. Time truly does slip through your fingers." The roast chicken and creamy mushroom soup I had ordered in advance had just arrived at the table. I asked my parents to select a few more dishes they liked, but they waved me away as usual, saying that this was enough and that we never finish more than this. Waste. I tried to reassure them that money was no longer a concern, but they refused to order anything more, no matter how hard I pressed them. At that point, I realized that true comfort and happiness are often wrapped in the quiet simplicity of a shared meal. Dinner lasted almost an hour and a half, and the restaurant lights were warm and inviting, casting a gentle glow over our table. I got up to go to the bathroom before we left, but as I turned the corner in the hallway, I heard a voice that made me stop dead in my tracks. They were eating and laughing like a big happy family, and the thought of them spending our money made me want to go in there and take that bag for myself. He was Tessa Brad's husband, and I knew right away that he was referring to us. Tessa and Brad had only been married for 6 months, but both had already quit their jobs because they were obsessed with get-rich-quick schemes. A few years ago, Tessa made a little money selling insurance, but she soon gave up on stability because she hated the grind of actual work. The feeling of being watched that I had had all afternoon was back, and now it was her. Brad was even worse overall. He had a gambling problem, and as soon as money touched his hands, he went to a poker table and lost every last dollar without thinking twice. Tessa hadn't been pregnant for more than 2 months, but the pregnancy didn't last because of her crazy lifestyle and bad habits. "You know your mother was incredibly biased," I heard her spit out in rage. "You're her son, and all she left you was that old dump. But the large sum of money she gave to that outsider Chad is most likely dead somewhere. If Kylie remarries, the money is gone. Just give it to a stranger. You need to find a way to get it back. Perhaps try with Ethan if you understand what I mean." She pressed her voice sharply and insistently. "You've gone crazy," to which Brad agreed. My palms were sweating when Brad said, "Okay, you keep an eye on the street. I'll stick close to them in here. Don't let the chance slip by." "Nephir, we can't do anything that would hurt him, so you're just going to sit back and watch Kylie." burn through all your mother's money." I took out my phone and silently pressed the record button, recording every word. And then I turned on my heel and rushed back to the table. Mom and Dad. I said softly, "Why don't you two go home a little?" "Early? I'll call a car for you." Ethan and I had something to take care of, so I tried not to show my excitement. As soon as I saw my parents go, I went outside, found a quiet corner, and called the police. I held Ethan's hand as we left the restaurant and walked down a dim alleyway. That led to a side street. It was a more peaceful way to get to the closest police station. The area was almost empty, but there was a small convenience store by the exit, run by an old friend we had known for years. If something went wrong, I hoped he could help. The streetlights behind us dimmed as we went farther down the alley, and I drew Ethan close, rushing our pace. But the uneasiness in my chest wouldn't let up. It felt like walking on thin ice, Mom. It's really dark. "Did we go the wrong way?" Ethan whispered in a worried voice. "It's okay, sweetheart. The exit is just ahead. We're almost there." I tried to sound calm, but Brad was at the end of the alley, feigning to tie his shoelaces. Was much too planned, and I knew right away that he had been waiting for us. I stopped and automatically moved to protect Ethan. A few seconds later, Tessa crept in from the other side, her eyes gleaming coldly, and she said, "Kylie," with a mocking edge. Before we had even finished speaking, I had to keep my cool. Despite my racing heart, Brad said, "If it's money, just say it." "You asked?" "We want the money you took from the old house," so I snapped. "You know that money was left to me, it wasn't yours." Tessa laughed bitterly. "Oh, please, you chose to take care of her. But that doesn't mean you get everything." I stood taller, holding my phone tightly. "Don't try to scare us." "I'm not bluffing," I said evenly. Brad hesitated for a moment, his confidence shaken. "You think I'd walk down a dark alley with my child and not prepare for this?" I called the police as soon as I left the restaurant. They were probably on their way. At this point, the only thing you can decide is how much trouble you want to be in the air. When the bell over the convenience store door chimed, someone had entered. James, the store owner, then peered out from behind the counter, his eyes immediately landing on us. Tessa hissed under her breath, "Brad, you're lying. Cops don't show up that fast." Brad looked around, his brows furrowed, his grip tightening around his phone. "We still have time, even if you call the police," Tessa said, in a low voice as I leaned in and pushed harder. "What you've already done is bad enough, but take one more step and it's kidnapping and you still have a way out." Brad noticed too, and I saw the flicker of panic in his face. But when he crossed that line, Brad's criminal sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hand trembled a little as he held his phone. James then left the store and turned to face us. Everything was fine until he called out Kylie, so I quickly replied, "James, could you please call the police again? Someone has been following us." That was all I saw when I noticed Tessa's face going pale. I said quietly, "If there's even a shred of decency left in you, don't make this worse." Brad continued, to hesitate for a moment longer before abruptly turning and running away. Damn it, she really called someone. She hissed, grabbed Brad by the arm, and let him go. As he disappeared down the other end of the alley with Tessa right behind him, the sirens began to sound louder. 10 minutes later, the police arrived, and James gave a full statement. I then gave them the audio recording I had previously made, which detailed everything Tessa had been doing, stalking their conversation in the hallway, making threats, and pursuing them. Nevertheless, the police took it seriously and started an investigation, calling both of them in for interrogation and filing a report. One of the female officers advised me to apply for a temporary protective order, to which I nodded in agreement. All I wanted was for them to avoid me, and my son. Ethan stood by my side the entire time, his little hand firmly gripping mine. He hadn't spoken, but I could feel the slight tremble in his fingers, so I gently squeezed his hand and told him, "It's okay now, sweetheart. Mom's here." That night, after we got home, Ethan fell asleep in my arms, and I ran a hand through his hair and listened to his steady, soft breathing for the first time in a long time. Feeling at peace, I realized that this house doesn't need anyone else to hold it. Together, I am the foundation of this family. Early the following morning, I opened the window and heard whispers coming in from just beyond the yard. "Did you hear that Tessa and Brad almost got into serious trouble last night? The police got involved in everything, and Brad has been drowning in debt from gambling for a long time." Poor Kylie, who looked after the elderly woman for 10 years, knew that this was inevitable. I didn't go outside. I didn't answer. I just stood at the window listening as their voices faded into the background. This town was so small that every ripple turned into a wave by the time it reached the farthest corner. Now that she has to deal with this mess, she's better off than they are, and she won't have to work another day in her life if she doesn't want to. Because of the money the old lady left her, I didn't have to explain anything. To put it plainly, eventually everyone would realize that Brad and Tessa had become the town's laughingstock, and that they were dealing with the worst mess of their lives. People had always complained about Brad's gambling problem, but now that everything was out in the open, his creditors tightened the news that he had once been able to balance things at the poker table, but now no one would give him credit, but not even the casinos did. Tessa fared even worse. She had been selling insurance and had played a nice game, but she never closed the deal. Her numbers were poor, and now that word had gotten out, the few leads she had started to fade away, and some neighbors even made fun of her in front of her for selling insurance with your reputation. She then posted a heartbreaking video online in which she sobbed about how poverty had forced her to attempt to reclaim what was rightfully hers. It was a pathetic plea, but the criticism in the comment section was harsh. Being broke doesn't give you the right to act like a thief. If you're poor, get a job, not someone else's money. Your sister-in-law took care of that woman for 10 years, not you. Where do you get the nerve? Her account was quickly reported and suspended by the platform for violating content policies. Lauren had remained silent for the most part, but after Brad and Tessa emerged as the town's favorite scandal, she finally broke down and called me. Her voice was full of her usual haughtiness. "Kylie, what the hell did you tell everyone?" I raised an mundane eyebrow, but I didn't tell anyone anything. People figure things out on their own. "Don't act so smug, you think," she scoffed. "I stopped my car a long time ago, and I've always known how you all saw me. I used to cling to the hope that perhaps we could still be a family. But now I see clearly that I was just your unpaid helper. You've won, Lauren, and you think you've really cut us off for good." I ended the call after saying, "You want to yell? Argue, burn bridges? Be my guest, but from now on, don't come looking for me." 3 days later, a gray suitcase arrived at the Pine Creek Pad train station. He was wearing a wrinkled trench coat, and his face was weathered and worn with faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He took a moment on the platform to pull out his phone and read the email from Lauren again. She was riding high, and now there was a rumor going around town that she had inherited all of Mom's money, cash, and property, possibly even more than that. "Are you really going to let her go with everything?" Lauren's message was well crafted, but every line pierced Chad's deepest fears. A picture of Kai and Ethan in a peaceful moment together, bathed in soft sunlight. But Chad saw something else, entirely. She's doing too well, and that ease and comfort she didn't think should be hers. His eyes narrowed, and he saw a flash of greed beneath the surface. That evening, Lauren met him at a local cafe in town. "So you really came back," she said, gazing at him across the table. "I assumed you would never return here. I wasn't planning to, but your message made me reconsider a few things." Lauren gave a brief, dry laugh. "Did you just smell the opportunity?" Chad didn't bother to deny it. He'd never concealed his intentions, especially when money was involved. "You're right," he said flatly. I'm not letting her take everything that was. Lauren sneered. Spare me the noble speech, but where were you all these years? Kylie took care of your mother for 10 years and you vanished, and you had no obligation to stay, he said, his tone hardening. I left because I knew this place had nothing to offer because Kylie chose to stay, but that doesn't entitle her to take it all. But, you know. She is legally entitled to that inheritance, Lauren said quietly, which is why I'm not using the legal system. Chad leaned in and spoke sharply and low, saying, I'm going for her emotional weak spot. Lauren frowned. You really think she has any emotions left? She's cold as ice now. She shut us all out. Then I'll use Ethan. Lauren's expression, which changed to show that you're out of your I don't need a real relationship, Chad said with a slow, bitter smile. All I need is for her to think that I feel a little remorse and a flicker of fatherly guilt. Lauren stared at him for a long time before shaking her head and laughing hollowly. You haven't changed at all when it comes to talking about family and fairness when all you really care about is the money and you're any different? He shot back, and after a few seconds, the air between them went silent. Lauren said softly, Then we have to plan this carefully. We can't push too hard. She's not the same woman she used to be, Chad said, getting up from his seat. That's why I need you to open the door first, because you're still her family and you can get closer than I ever could. When do you plan to show up? The sooner, the better. I want to give her a sharp dose of reality while she's still lost in her little dream of freedom. That day, I had just left the neighborhood grocery store with a bag of bread and milk swinging gently in my hand. The sun was bright, and early spring flowers were blooming along both sides of the street. I turned the corner and stopped dead in my tracks. He was wearing a gray trench coat, and he was dragging an old suitcase behind him. He smiled tiredly. The man who had left our lives 10 years ago without saying a word was suddenly standing directly in front of me, and for a brief moment I lost my ability to breathe because it felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. However, my initial reaction was not one of rage or tears, but rather a sharp sense of unfamiliarity. He spoke first. Horrid but recognizable Kylie, I automatically took a step back in shock and asked, Is that really you? I tried to remain calm as I spoke, but the coldness in my voice startled even me. What are you doing here? I asked flatly, and he grinned as if he had practiced this just to see how things were. I didn't answer. I just lifted the bag in my. I stood in the kitchen, that night chopping potatoes, but my mind kept replaying his face. He had more gray in his hair, and there were deeper lines around his face. I couldn't even bring myself to look back, so I walked right past him. My spine felt stiff as stone did this. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him still standing there. He didn't follow or say another word. Ethan was sitting in the living room working on a puzzle, completely unaware of the storm that was stirring just beneath the surface, when it suddenly struck me that he didn't even remember what his father looked like. Chad had been gone for 10 whole years, and I had weathered every storm taking care of his father. His eyes, however, looked exactly the same. That familiar hollow detachment hadn't changed at all. 2 days later, Chad appeared at my door. I refused to let him inside, instead letting him stand on the porch with his hands in his pockets, pretending to be an old friend looking for redemption. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said, adding that he was a mother raising a child alone and enduring every hardship that Syl had faced. Desire to see Ethan? Perhaps we could talk sometime. I looked at him for a long time before I spoke, but there was nothing more for us to discuss. I'm not here to take anything, he said quickly. I just want to accept some responsibility because these past years haven't been easy for me either. I laughed bitterly. Now you remember you're a father. I know I messed up, he said softly. But I truly wanted to put things right, so I didn't back down, and I spoke up. Even what you think you can give isn't what our son needs. And whatever brought you back, I'll figure it out soon enough. Chad didn't come back in the days that followed, but I knew he was still in the area because I saw him getting groceries, sitting quietly in the town square, and even hanging around by the school route around the time Ethan was dismissed. One afternoon, Ethan said, "Mom, a man stopped me today after I got home and said he was my dad." The hanger I was holding slipped a little in my hand, and I felt a chill go up my spine. I asked him, listening to my voice, "What did you say to him?" I said I didn't remember him, and he said I looked just like him. Ethan shrugged, but I don't think I do, and his smile was strange, so I knelt down next to him and gingerly took. His Ethan nodded, but I could see the questions already starting to form in his eyes. It was Lauren who answered the phone that evening. "So you've seen Chad?" Her tone was casual, as if she were inquiring about a neighbor who was moving away. "But you knew he was coming back, didn't you?" My voice instantly grew colder. After a moment, she said, "To see his child." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "He's not a bad person, Lauren," I said softly, my voice lowering. "Don't bother pretending that he disappeared for 10 years, without a single letter or phone call, and now he just happens to show up. Do you really expect me to believe this is some sort of family reunion, Kylie? You can't be so black and white. He's still Ethan's father, isn't he?" I didn't answer, but a suspicion was growing stronger in my mind. By the time Chad hadn't returned on a whim, he had disappeared for 10 years, as if he had disappeared from the world. Now, shortly after his mother passed away and I inherited money, he reappeared for no apparent reason. But if his true motivation was the money, I needed to get ready for his next move. Then, move. And I was more convinced than ever that he didn't. Return alone. He and Lauren were probably in this together, plotting from the beginning. Outside, the wind shook the blinds, so I took a deep breath. Chad was back, but this time I wouldn't be the gullible woman who followed wherever others led. I wasn't the Kylie of 10 years ago, and Lauren had been in my life more and more lately, to the point where it was getting hard to ignore her. She brought me pastries, invited me out for tea, and even offered to help sort through old belongings at the house. "You've got your hands full raising Ethan and managing the move," she said warmly, smiling. "I just thought I'd lend a hand after all." She no longer spoke in her usual condescending tone and was neither smug nor sharp-headed. "We are family," but I was aware that the sudden warmth didn't feel like kindness. Rather, it felt like a tactic. Lauren wasn't the kind to be lenient without cause, and every kind gesture and offer of assistance was a subtle needle that tested the limits of my defenses. That afternoon, as we sat in the old house's living room, she asked casually, "So, what are you planning?" while dusting off a shelf. "If you're really attached to it, you could always keep it for Ethan. After all, it was his grandmother's house, so perhaps someday when he's older he'll want to come back and visit." I didn't respond. I just gave a slight smile, sensing I was not biting, but she changed the subject. "Chad keeps telling me how much I've changed lately, and when I looked it up, Lauren laughed quietly. He didn't mean it negatively. He was just saying that you've become so strong that you take on everything on your own. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to let someone else share the load occasionally." She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, and the implication was obvious. I sat alone on the balcony that night for a long time, thinking about the girl I'd been 10 years ago. The new bride who entered this house full of hope and was willing to do anything to feel like she belonged. But now, that house was no longer my home. That man was my husband was no longer my husband. He had returned for money, not out of love or regret. This bitter truth didn't surprise me, but it still made my chest hurt. The following day, I took Ethan to the town's children's library, where we sat in the reading area while he silently turned through a picture book about galaxies and space. I watched him from next to the shelf, admiring the composed, focused expression on his young face. "Mom, I was taken aback when he abruptly turned to face me. "Do you think that man truly wants to spend time with me?" I paused, caught off guard. He keeps asking me what I like and what I want, but he never asks how my day went. My eyes stung, sweetie. "Do you like him?" I asked gently. He shook his head and went back to his book, and I realized that even though he is still young, he can sense it. Who truly loved him and who didn't? Later that afternoon, I got home and took out the documents Marie had left me, including the inheritance documents, bank records, trust fund proposals, and financial planning notes. I went over everything and made sure that the money needed to be protected, not only for me, but also for Ethan. I made an appointment with my lawyer because I needed to update all of my financial records, and I wanted to create a trust fund specifically. For Ethan, designating him as the only beneficiary, I included a clear guardian exclusion clause that forbids anyone, including his father, from accessing or influencing the account in any way. I wasn't going to wait for Chad to take action because I had already taken action until everything was revealed. I didn't intend to face them head-on. Instead, I would continue to live, smile, and even appreciate Lauren's generosity. The late spring breeze had started to carry a restless heat, and I could feel Chad growing impatient by the day. For weeks, he had maintained the ACT-controlled, polite, even helpful act, showing up along Ethan's route from school. However, they were unaware that I was no longer following their script and that I was always 3 steps ahead of them. Occasionally, I would grab a cup of coffee and pretend to be the well-meaning ex-boyfriend at community events. It seemed like he genuinely wanted to be involved in his son's life, but I knew better. This was all a setup, and he was waiting for me to let him in so he could eventually open the door to that money. Little did he know, though, that the door had already been sealed shut. That day, I got a call from the bank saying, "Hello, Miss Kylie Jones." And we received my knuckles turned white when I heard Mr. Chad Jones, who claimed to be Ethan Jones's legal guardian, ask for access to the trust fund details and submit an application to start a withdrawal. I calmly explained that no one was allowed to access that account and that the fund was created with me as the sole trustee, with a clause specifically excluding his father from any after a short silence. The voice on the other end of the financial authority line said, "Now firm and formal, understood, we've reviewed the documents. Everything is in order. Rest assured, all control remains in your hands." I hung up the phone, not satisfied but with a steady sense of resolve that Chad had finally taken action, and less than half an hour later, my lawyer forwarded a copy of the bank's official denial letter. I could practically imagine Chad's face when he read it. He had calculated everything except for the fact that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. He wrote out the terms of the fund in black and white and addressed it directly to Chad, the applicant, in accordance with the trust founder's wishes and contractual terms. "You hold no authority over this fund. Do not submit any more invalid requests." The following day, Lauren appeared. When she first arrived at my door, she went straight to the point, saying, "You're ruthless. But this isn't ruthlessness. It's protection." She clenched her jaw and looked at me, but her voice lacked its typical force. "You think you've won, but Chad isn't the type of man who gives up easily. He can fight all he wants," I said softly, "but he'll never get a scent that what you're trying to take was never yours to be with." Lauren stood suddenly, her tone sharpening. "Don't get too full of yourself." I smiled slightly. "I'm not. You were the ones who thought this would be easy." And she slammed the door behind her, leaving a hint of resentment and frustration in the air. Several days later, I saw Chad outside the grocery store. He appeared to have aged 10 years, with his face drawn and his eyes clouded with defeat and exhaustion. The man who once left our house with his chest puffed with confidence oozing from every word now appeared to be a worn-out shadow of himself. He saw me and took a tentative step forward before stopping, uncertain, and I stood motionless, watching him calmly. "You won, Kylie," he said quietly. His eyes fell to the floor, and it took him a moment to speak again. "I thought maybe I could still hold on to something you once had a whole family." So I said softly, "No," I replied evenly. "You were just too greedy. This was never a competition. You've simply never understood that some things can't be taken by force or manipulation. Who left? If you have nothing now, it's because you made that decision." Chad stayed in town for a few more days, then quietly packed his belongings and left, saying no grand farewell or drama, just disappearing the way he did all those years ago. Lauren never returned, and the two people who had once worked so hard to ruin my life were finally gone for good. A few days later, I began getting involved in the local library was seeking volunteers, so I signed up. The neighborhood association needed assistance with event planning, so I showed up to set up tables and hang decorations. The children's art group. I became a regular when the center requested parent helpers because you're always so considerate. Susan, one of the organizers, said warmly, "With you around, everything just runs smoother." I smiled lightly, perhaps because I'm just used to looking after people, but Susan didn't notice that this time my smile felt lighter than it had in years. Ethan had also begun to adjust to this new chapter. His emotions had settled, and he seemed more relaxed and more approachable every afternoon after school. He would come home full of stories about what happened in class and the game they played during recess. Last week, he brought home a certificate for excellence on a math quiz, which I proudly hung on the refrigerator door and found myself looking at whenever I passed by. In the evenings, he would work quietly at his desk on his homework while I worked next to him. Reviewing notes for a project I had been considering for months, I wanted to start a small home-based consulting business that made use of the caregiving skills I'd developed over the years, creating a place where women like me who are overwhelmed and forgotten can go for support, guidance, and maybe just a listening ear. It wasn't just about making money. It was about providing something I had once sorely needed. I contacted an old friend who was now employed in family services. She was in charge of a community program focused on, "You really want to do this, Kylie?" she asked, a little taken aback. I nodded. There was a time when I wished someone would reach out and pull me out of the dark. Now I want to be that hand for someone else. She reached over and gave me a gentle squeeze on the hand. "You've changed, Kylie. You've grown into someone stronger, someone better." I didn't say anything. I just smiled, quietly forward, as if nothing had happened, but as if everything had changed. The trees along the street had started to sprout tender new leaves. Sunlight spilled across the windowsill, and the air carried the soft scent of early summer. In the kitchen, I made a cup of black tea, and the only sound in the house was the soft simmering of the kettle. Ethan was writing at his desk, and the sunlight touched his shoulders, giving the room a golden hue. He wrote in his notebook with concentrated attention, tilting his head occasionally to reflect before moving on. He had grown taller, his features gradually losing the softness of childhood and becoming sharper, calmer, and more defined. This was my life now, simple and quiet, free of needless people and emotions. That afternoon, Ethan and I went for a walk through the... He held my hand tightly while he talked to me about the new art class at school. He told me how he had drawn a huge tree with a small bird's nest made out of cut paper. "Mom, did you like drawing when you were little?" I smiled. I did, but I was not very good at it. "I bet your drawings were way better than mine," he said earnestly. "I know it's down," he said as he hugged him, "but your tree is the best I've ever seen." Light and bright, then pulled me along as we continued to walk, sunlight filtering through the branches and strewn across the path in gentle flickering patterns. My steps were steady and unhurried, just like life itself, which is no longer hurried or lost. That evening, we prepared dinner together in the kitchen, and he washed the vegetables while I stood at the stove on the table and sat his drawing of the large tree I had pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet, "Will be there forever," and it will remind me that there was a little boy in this kitchen once, cleaning vegetables, laughing, and telling stories. His eyes glistened and he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll protect you just like you protect me." My heart stopped for a second, and my hands hesitated over the skillet before I smiled and nodded. Deal. We made a promise. Late at night, the home sank into a peaceful silence, and I sat by myself on the balcony with my tea cold. The streetlights in the distance flickered softly and occasionally. When a nightbird sounded in the darkness, I closed my eyes and reflected on the suffering I had endured along the way. The difficult times I had spent alone had gradually subsided like waves on a body of water. I eventually stopped needing approval from others. I apologized. I had discovered a method to keep the hurt hidden in the back of my mind and still go on with my life. Ethan's soft breathing was the most soothing sound I could hear in my life from inside, and in a low voice that was intended just for me, I declared, "I'm home, truly home, in my own life." I rose gradually and shut the window after the night breeze had lifted the curtains. It was a home that was ultimately entirely mine,